Eye Podcast. The number one show to bring you all things Club America in English. From tactical analysis
Pelota para la banda izquierda.
to player updates. We've got you covered on all the latest news on Las Águilas. Now, let's start the show. This is the Eagle Eye Podcast.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another episode of the Eagle Eye Podcast. Today, we are talking all things CONCACAF Champions Cup. And so we're ready to bring you guys up to date with everything going on in and around the world, Las Águilas del América, and get you guys ready just 24 hours before kickoff against New England. So, it's going to be me on the Eagle Eye podcast side of things. But joining me today is a very special guest to help us break everything down from New England. It is none other than Greg from the Revolution Recap Podcast. Greg, how are you? Well, already messing up right there. Give me 1 second. I'll bring Greg right in. And there we go.
Hello.
How are you, Greg?
I'm doing fine. Thank you so much for having me on today.
No, thank you so much for coming on. Excited to talk CONCACAF Champions Cup with you. Excited to hear your perspective coming into this one. I know a lot of people paint this as, kind of Club America as the favorite coming into this game, but I do think you guys have something up your guys' sleeve to make life a little bit difficult for us. So I'm curious to see what that is from your guys' perspective, and I'm curious to hear what your guys' thoughts are on Club America itself. So again, thank you so much for coming on, and let's just get right into it if you're ready.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Well, I'll just give everyone here a quick recap of what's going on in the world of Las Águilas del América. America's coming off a 2-1 victory against Atlético San Luis, a game that we talked about previously on the podcast, and where we thought, this could be potentially a throwaway game just because of all the injuries and everything going on in and around America. So we thought, you know what? If we end up drawing, it's not going to be the end of the world. America ended up getting the 3 points, which was huge to continue kind of scaling the table. And because of a couple results here and there, we technically sit first place right now in Liga MX. And in the injury department, it looks like it's getting worse for America. We've lost another player due to injury in that Atlético San Luis game. Elian Hernandez, unfortunately, goes out in the first half. So that's kind of a little bit of an update from the America perspective. Greg, talk to me a little bit about New England. You guys actually had a bye week, so you guys have been off for a little bit now, off that 1-1 draw against Chicago Fire.
Yeah, this has been their longest break of the season. I think every single week they've had so far, they've had 2 games until their last match week, where they only had the 1 game against Chicago, and now they've had about 10 days off. The Revolution have had a really mixed bag in Champions Cup. They've breezed through easily against Independiente and Alajuelense. But then in the domestic league in MLS, they only have 1 point through 5 games. One game they've had where they probably should have won and ran into a hot team and had some bad luck. One game they had a red card. One game they really just didn't show up to play. That was the Chicago game, which should have been 3 points at home. They ended up just taking the draw there. So it's kind of been a different story every single week for them in MLS, and they really haven't found their footing. And I think the overwhelming sentiment in New England is there's a lot more concern than positivity right now. I think a lot of people feel that their form in MLS is kind of more telling to which side is the true team in New England.
It's interesting because I'm glad you bring it up, because a lot of America fans will maybe not necessarily follow New England Revolution closely, and they'll kind of pull up their SofaScore app and just be like, okay, where's New England at the table? They see him dead last, and they're thinking, okay, 1 point, and to start off their season, we should be technically the favorites. And I think we still are the favorites, but I don't think this is necessarily going to be a walk in the park the way I think most America fans anticipate it will be. Just because I feel like you guys have a point to prove, and I have a feeling that you guys have a little bit of ghost of Champions League past, where you guys almost had it against Pumas, but then it just slipped through you guys' fingers. So I think that's going to be another one of those things that kind of will play to the added atmosphere that's going to be going on tomorrow night at Gillette Stadium. So It's going to be an interesting one. What do you think has been the case for you guys? Do you guys think you guys have been as bad as the league showcases, or do you think it's just been just coincidental that the results haven't been going your way, and maybe you guys have been prioritizing Champions Cup?
Yeah, well, I think your listeners should know that the Revs aren't the worst team in MLS. They might pull up the standings page and see them sitting at the bottom, and that really isn't the talent on this team. In MLS, typically every single year, the teams that are in Champions Cup or Champions League in years past typically struggle at the beginning of the year due to the schedule congestion. If you look at LAFC last year, who made MLS Cup, they're by far one of the best teams in MLS. They struggled at the beginning of the season due to the roster congestion. Due to MLS's roster rules, there's only 30 slots available, and basically, long story short, the rules aren't really built for teams at the beginning of the season that are kind of coming off of a limited preseason, and it's kind of a mix between playing 2 games a week, having a new head coach in Caleb Porter who took over for Bruce Arena, and ultimately a little bit of bad luck. Now, I also want to say I'm not totally sure this is a team that's going to be contending for a championship this season. So your listeners should be happy you're running into the New England Revolution as opposed to a full strength Inter Miami, LAFC, Atlanta United. There's a bunch of teams that I think people think of as MLS powerhouses, and the New England Revolution aren't one of them. And they certainly don't seem to be the team that they were at the beginning of last season. I don't know how much you want to go into last season, but they started out very hot. They had some issues with Bruce Arena, our manager at the time. He had to resign due to inappropriate conduct, and essentially our season spiraled all downhill from there. So we're starting this season kind of fresh. It's not clear if there's a lingering feeling that there in the locker rooms. There might be still a little locker room disruption going on, but that's kind of where the Revolution are right now. It's not clear if they are the team we saw at the beginning of last season in 2023 that's strong and looks like they are going to be contenders in the Eastern Conference, or if they're going to be a bottom 10 team in the league, which they were towards the end of the year. But either way, they're not a MLS Cup favorite by any means. So I would make Club America the favorite in this matchup.
All right. Well, nice to know take right there. And obviously with America, the stature that we are and the club that we are, right, representing not just Mexico, but the region of CONCACAF as a whole, because we do hold the most, Champions Cup trophies. There's that added weight and that added pressure. So I'm curious to see how tomorrow's going to end up. But before I think we can progress any further with this conversation, I think we need to address the elephant in the room, Greg. And that is the crazy, and I don't know, this might be a first time for CONCACAF, the crazy 24 hours that was after you guys had secured your ticket into the next round to face us. It's all pointed to us hosting the first leg and you guys hosting the second leg. And due to stadium conflicts, you guys had to forfeit that and hand over the second leg over to us. I was listening to your guys' podcast whenever you guys recorded it, and you guys put on the little show notes like this was recorded prior to New England kind of making that press release. Does any of what you guys talked about just kind of change? Does the script kind of just go out the window and now things are looked at in a different lighting? Because, when you guys were talking about it on your podcast, you guys mentioned that the importance of going into the Azteca for the first leg, maybe trying to get a 1-0 loss, or maybe even manage a draw, and then coming into at home and maybe kind of trying to bury the hatchet with America there. Now, how do you look at this from that perspective? And first of all, your initial reactions whenever you saw the news break that you guys had forfeited that?
Well, let me get to the initial reactions first. So for those that don't know, the Revolution play at Gillette Stadium, which is shared with the Patriots, which is an American football team, and they play typically in the fall, so there's no conflict there. But there's a handful of other events that happen at Gillette Stadium throughout the rest of the calendar year. Concerts. It turns out there is, I think, Monster Trucks that's going to be happening the weekend following this match next weekend. So I guess in preparation, there's also an expo there happening at Gillette Stadium, correct, I believe, this week. So I guess between the expo and the preparation of the fields, I'm guessing that when they made this agreement with Motocross or Monster Trucks or whatever is going to be there, there was no opt-out clause or ability to reschedule this for later. And so the Revolution could not play at the time that they could not play the second leg at Gillette Stadium. Initial reaction, I think, is disappointed but not surprised. I think most people that follow this team know that Robert Kraft, who owns the Revolution, his baby is the New England Patriots, and we're always kind of the second child that isn't as loved. So it's very frustrating to have kind of ownership that doesn't have their entire heart in the club like some of the supporters do. And this is, this should be one of the biggest games for our team, for our franchise in the last decade. And I think any enthusiasm and hope that people had, to give your opponent a competitive advantage in giving them the second leg because of motocross is very disheartening. And I think for me, and I think for a lot of other supporters, it is it's just disheartening and discouraging, and it always just kind of feels like the Revolution are not the number one priority. And again, it's a scheduling conflict. I'm sure when this was made, it was months ago. People didn't even know if the Revolution would be in the Champions Cup. So who knows what the schedule was, if there was any way to prevent this. But either way, it's really disappointing. In terms of my thoughts on the first and second leg, I absolutely think that the Revolution would have a much better chance in a second leg, knowing what you need to do at home. I think if the Revolution went into that game knowing how aggressive they needed to be, how many goals they needed at home, I think that having the second leg really does give them an advantage there. Whereas in this first leg, I'm going to be interested how aggressive they are. I mean, if the Revolution are up 1-0, are they protecting that lead, or do they need to go on the front foot and push for more? Because I think when they go down to Mexico City, you mentioned the Pumas game. We took a 3-0 lead down to Pumas, and we did not win that tie. We ended up losing 3-0 in that game. We ended up losing on penalties. And so we know how badly things can go when we go south of the border to travel for a second leg. So, there could be a situation, even if the Revs get lucky and they go up 1-0, 2-0, do you push forward and risk conceding an away goal, which matters in this competition, or do you kind of sit tight? That wouldn't be an issue if you had the second leg at home. So it's very frustrating, and I think it does really put the Revolution at more of a disadvantage than they already are at.
Yeah, it was a very peculiar situation. Like I mentioned, I think it was maybe the first for CONCACAF. I don't know how, if you're on Twitter as much or not. And I don't know what the Revolution Twitter was looking like, but on the America perspective, there's this narrative that was going around that that our owner somehow managed a way to bribe the situation, pay for us to get the return leg. It was the most hilarious thing in the world. And America fans just kind of ran with it. But yeah, it was...
I should say, that isn't that far-fetched, because back when I believe it was the Champions League, not Superliga. This was before my time when I covered the Revs. I believe it was the Champions League in the 2000s. So probably we're talking 10, 15 years ago. The Revolution sold the rights to play a Champions League game for something like $10,000. And I think that it was against a team in Trinidad and Tobago or something like that. I'd have to look up the exact details. My co-host would know. But that was one of the more embarrassing moments in our franchise's history, that we essentially forfeited. We gave up a home game and played it in the Caribbean, and of course ended up losing that game. So that's not a very far-fetched idea. I'm sure if the Revs could have gotten a couple dollars out of it, truth be told, I think a lot of fans would feel a little better about it too.
Well, that's hilarious, because like I mentioned, it's just that it's a running narrative for America, when just the league in general thinks that our owner pays off the referees, or that that he's the powerhouse because he's also the owner of Televisa, which is obviously the biggest TV network over there in Mexico, which is kind of the one that holds and distributes most of the games out into the country. So it's hilarious. So yeah, it was funny seeing all of that kind of break out. But initially, I think we were talking about it in our group chat, and we thought, well, you know what, this is kind of maybe a blessing in disguise, because with all the injuries that we were getting right now that were kind of piling up, you can kind of go into the second leg, maybe not necessarily just kind of ride the storm, but you maybe just go out there, field it, play it, and then worst case scenario, you have a second leg at home, and we know what America is capable of doing. That whenever they do have to eventually maybe even chase a game at home, we look like we are unstoppable at moments. So we'll see exactly what that case is. But yeah, I thought it'd be interesting to first start off with that conversation because it was talked about heavily, and I was just like, wow, it's crazy, absolutely crazy. But
Only
we talked
the
about
revolution. Only the revolution that happened to. That'll never happen with Inter Miami. It'll never happen with LAFC. Only the revolution.
only with New England. It was the craziest thing was the whole Expo thing for me. I was like, wow, and Expo was what helped out at the end too, because obviously you tie that up with the motocross stuff, and you just, I guess you get this outcome. But yeah, let's move on here, and let's talk about what we could potentially be seeing tomorrow night at Gillette. You mentioned that you were curious to see how aggressive New England's going to be coming into this game. Obviously, you guys need a result here, and I would imagine a result for you guys would be a victory. I don't think you guys would settle for a draw in any situation. So, talk to me. How does New England try to kind of orchestrate a masterpiece against America at home? And what are you looking out for on Tuesday's match?
Well, that's a great question, and if I had the answer, I'd be coaching the team. I mean, it's going to be very difficult for the Revolution to figure out. There's a stat that someone on the Blazing Musket, which is the outlet that covers the Revolution throughout the year, a stat they had was that the Revolution right now are third in MLS in touches per game, but inside the opposition area, they're 21st in MLS. So a big key is whether or not the Revolution will be able to kind of break through the defense and get into the box and get dangerous chances. They've been shooting from farther out. They've been having difficulty working the ball into the box. It's been a bit of a very frustrating season. And again, with a new manager, Caleb Porter, and the schedule congestion, a lot of the narrative is that maybe his system, maybe it's taking some time to implement the way they want to play, because right now there's just a lot of passing in the midfield. So I would expect to see the Revolution take some more chances, probably with long balls into the box with some more direct play. They're not great at crossing. Right now, our starting striker, Giacomo Vrioni, he is not the best header. He usually wants the ball at his feet. So I would expect a lot of dangerous through balls and really trying to test that back line to see if they can kind of get lucky there. What I think the Revolution may do coming out of this game is maybe hold possession, try to shorten the game, and then take some shots late. But there's really not a great way. There's not a major path for a 3 or 4 goal performance from the Revolution here because they've had such struggles getting into the box and scoring. So maybe they get lucky with a long shot. They do have some talented players that can shoot from outside the box. Carlos Gil is our best player. You'll see him on the ball a ton tomorrow. He's arguably one of the best players in MLS. He won the MVP in 2021, and he's the primary chance creator. He has a great shot as well, so he might take some shots at goal from long range if he's given the chance. Thomas Shankalai is another designated player. He's an exciting young player that they've acquired last year. He can shoot from range too, although he obviously prefer to be in the box a little bit more. He hasn't scored yet in MLS, but I believe he has 4 goals in Champions Cup competition. So they do have some dangerous pieces that can shoot from range, but the Revs will want to get the ball in the box and score from there.
All right. Well, Greg, I got to tell you, this is music to my ears because America struggles in the aerial duels, and to know that you guys that's not your strong point, it puts me a little bit at ease knowing that all we need to do is just contain those through balls and we should be fine. That is obviously our biggest weakness right now is the aerial battle. So if you guys do get a corner or a free kick opportunity, I would assume that you guys would try to capitalize on that, but hearing that isn't maybe your guys' strong point, and it's looking like a okay scenario already for Las Águilas del América.
And just to give a little more context too, the past few years, the Revolution relied heavily on crosses from the outside, from the wings. And prior to Giacomo Vrioni, we had a striker, Adam Buksa, who's now with the Polish national team. I believe he's playing in Turkey. He was a phenomenal header of the ball. And when the Revolution won Supporters Shield, which goes to the team with the best record in the regular season in MLS, I think he scored 15 or 16 goals. So a lot of the way the Revolution have played, they've had to kind of readjust to kind of more of a moving the ball through the middle of possession style as opposed to going down the wings and shooting in crosses, because they're learning that Vrioni is not Adam Buksa. So yeah, I agree with your sentiment there, and I think this matchup plays very nicely for you guys.
I do believe so, because specifically, if you guys are going to try to take the game to us early on, normally in a situation where we have all our players fit, I would say that's an ideal situation for America, because on the wings we have pace to abuse, but seeing as how we don't have no Quinones, Brian Rodriguez traveled a little bit late, so I don't expect him to start on Tuesday. Sendejas probably is not going to start either. He's still a little bit with a knock. I don't expect them to try to rush him into anything. So we do still have a little bit of pace, but nothing too drastic that I think we'll be able to kind of heavily rely on, like a counterattacking style at all. So, but it does provide a little bit of good feeling knowing that, okay, you guys take the game to us. Defensively, we've been very well organized, and we've been very well in containing space. And so I think that, Cáceres is going to be playing in this one, so he's our best defender. I think he reads the game perfectly in those scenarios, and where he kind of has to anticipate a pass, or maybe, sprint down the line and cut off any channels as possible. So I think that on that end should be good for America. Going forward, though, I think this is where a lot of question marks are going to be around as to whether or not America is capable of producing something going forward. You guys talked about your number 10. Our number 10, who was out with a little bit of an injury, looks like he's back. He scored in that San Luis game, Diego Valdez. He is going to be heavily relied on Tuesday's game as to what he can create, especially if there's not going to be no Fidalgo in that midfield. It's going to be up to him to kind of orchestrate everything and kind of get things going for America, and whether or not he can unlock the best of Henry Martin. So it's going to be an interesting game, to say the least, as far as the aggressiveness and the intensity. Karen is the type of manager that likes to have the ball at his feet, and he likes his teams to press very high in key moments of the match, and then in certain moments, I do expect for us to give you guys the ball possession, but then find a way to get the counter going as well. So he kind of likes to rely on either or, and yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. Do you have a potential starting 11 that you could see starting tomorrow?
Yeah, so our goalkeeper is going to be Henrik Rabas. He just got back from international duty with the Slovakian national team. And then our back line is going to be Duan Jones on the left. He's with the United States men's national team pool. He's down on the depth chart. He's not making the World Cup roster, but he gets called into some camps. Our center backs are probably going to be Dave Romney and Henry Kessler. Both are very good center backs, although Henry Kessler has had some injury problems in the past couple of years. On the right side, it's going to be either Andrew Farrell, who is not much of an offensive threat. He's more of a defensive-minded player, or Nick Lima, who is a little defensively struggles, but can get up in the attack. So if they play Nick Lima, that might tip away how much Caleb Porter wants to get the outside backs up in the attack a little bit. So one of them will be at the right back. And I'll also say here that our starting right back, Brandon Bai, tore his ACL last year in Leagues Cup. So that is a spot that we will have our typical starter there later in the year. So that might be a potential weakness to exploit from your end. In the midfield, I expect Matt Polster and Ian Harkes, and then Carlos Gil as our number 10. He's kind of a free roaming player. And then on the left, it's probably going to be Thomas Shankalai. And then on the right, it'll either be Nacho Gil, which is Carlos's brother, or Esmir Baraktarovic, who is a very promising young player in the United States men's national team pool. He's already gotten a call up to the senior team. A lot of teams in Europe are apparently interested in him, and he's one of the next players from MLS that will be looking to make the leap into Europe in the near future. And then our striker is Giacomo Vrioni, who I mentioned earlier. He won the Austrian Golden Boot in 2021, 2022, but has come over to New England and has really struggled to find his footing struggle to make a real impact with the team. And the other thing too with this team is that our backup striker Bobby Wood has been battling knee injuries this preseason. He basically started last year with the team and had a phenomenal first half of the season, faded off, and he suffered an injury in preseason. And there's really no one behind Vrioni and Bobby Wood in the depth chart. So if Vrioni needs to go off, you might see Shankalai move up top, which is not his best position and also might play into your favor. So that's kind of how the Revolution will line up. It'll be interesting to see if there's any major changes, but for the most part, you can kind of expect a 4-2-3-1 with those players.
Okay, interesting. I like it. Let's see if let's see how many you get right tomorrow. Should be interesting. For America's perspective, you're gonna see Luis Malagón in net. He has been, I think, top 3 best players for us this season. The goalkeeper is just hounding to try to be the number 1 for the Mexican national team, and he's making a good argument for himself. So he's gonna be in net. On the right hand side, I think we're finally gonna see Kevin Alvarez, who just kind of a situation like you guys, our starting right back wasn't fully fit, and so we struggled in that area to find a replacement. We didn't really have a natural backup, so we ended up using a couple center backs in that position. It paid okay, but having Kevin back is going to be a big plus, especially going forward, seeing as how he really brings out the best in America whenever he does attack. Defending, sometimes he can be a little bit off, but still, we'll have him on the right-hand side. And the center-back partnership is going to be Igor Lichnowsky and Sebastian Cáceres. I already mentioned to you, Cáceres is by far the best defender we got, and most likely will be making that leap to Europe next season as well. He is just sought out by a lot, and a lot of European teams as well. And it also looks like his international manager from Uruguay is telling him to make that leap as well if he wants to continue to cement his starting position with the Uruguay national team. And on the left back side, we're going to have Christian Chicote Calderon. He's just kind of been a staple for Jardines since his inclusion this season. And in the midfield is where things will be a little bit interesting. Now, Fidalgo and Sendejas did make the travel over to Foxborough, but they're still, I think, a little bit up in the air as to whether or not they're going to start. I would imagine that they're not going to rush them, so we will probably see them in the second half. But with that said, I do think that the midfield partnership is going to be Jonathan Dos Santos and Richard Sanchez. I think that's a pretty good midfield partnership to get the job done. Richard looks like he's been playing just a little bit better, knowing that he gets a little bit more minutes now. So hopefully we'll see the best of him. On the right-hand side, I think you're going to see Javairo Dilrosun. He's our new winger that we've just acquired from Feyenoord from the Dutch league. So he's itching to make a statement for himself. I mean, he already has had some good glimpses with us, and so I think a good performance in a Champions Cup could help him kind of go up the pecking order and maybe bench Sendejas, although Sendejas has been playing tremendously with us. And on the left-hand side, I think it's going to be Salvador Reyes, only because Brian Rodriguez traveled late with the team. I mentioned it, no Quiñones, which again is unfortunate for us, and so that's kind of the depth that we have in that area. And in that number 10 spot, Diego Valdez, like I mentioned, I think it's definitely going to have to be the battle of the 10s tomorrow. I don't see how it's not going to be with Carlos Gil and how good of a player he's been for you guys for such a long time. I do think that this is going to be one of those situations where I think Diego Valdez has to step up and carry the team on his shoulders. And then, of course, up top, Henry Martin, and we're kind of in a similar situation. We don't have a natural substitute for the strikers. So if Henry goes off, it's going to be a little bit makeshift. So we do expect him to play the full 90. So we'll see what happens there. So yeah,
it'll be very interesting, and I'm curious to see how you guys approach it too. I feel like the injuries help us out a lot in this first leg, and hopefully, I don't want to say hopefully as a neutral supporter technically, but I think it plays into the Revolution that maybe you guys don't come out as attacking minded. Maybe there's a little less speed on the counter attack that will really help us out there. It'll be very interesting to see how it plays out.
No, indeed. But what I will say is I think that this is one of those type of games is where if you're not necessarily a starter and you're seeing yourself get some minutes here, I think that they want to prove themselves to the manager. And so I would expect that they come in and try to showcase us, to tell the manager, be like, hey, look, I'm starter quality. But I've been saying that for like the past year with some of these players, and they just have not been able to do that. So we'll see. We'll see what the case is. But yeah, I'm curious to hear. All right, who has to be for you the player of the match that isn't named Carlos Gil for New England?
Oh, that has to be the player of the match. Well, let me give you
the player that's gonna make it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, let me give you a few, because I think there's different phases where we're going to need players to step up. I'm going to go with Giacomo Vrioni as the striker. The lack of goal scoring from our number 9 has been a very obvious issue with this team. At the end of last season, this year, Vrioni scored, I believe it was in the Cincinnati game. Or maybe it was the road game at Alajuelense. That was his first goal since Leagues Cup last year, just to give you an idea of how long it had been since our starting striker had scored. So he's going to need to really step up, and a lot of people have been criticizing him. A lot of people feel like most of his goals have come against weaker competition. This is a game where if he steps up, it's a big statement game, like you were talking about a minute ago. Another player that I think needs to step up is Matt Polster, who will be our prime defensive midfielder when we had our Supporters Shield Cup run. He was an absolute bulldog in the midfield, winning balls, stopping counterattacks, moving the ball very well, getting things going the other way. He's taken a step back in the past few years, and there's a crowded midfield right now. The Revolution acquired Mark-Anthony Kaye from Toronto last year, who's also a defensive-minded midfielder. So Polster, Caleb Porter has said in press conferences that Matt Polster is a key player for them. It'll be interesting to see how he is able to handle a tough opponent if he's able to keep up. And then I'll also point to Henrik Rabas, our goalkeeper, who we acquired this past offseason from Poland. He's had not a great start to his career with the Revolution, and the keeper he's replacing was George Petrovic, who is now with Chelsea, who he sold for, I think, $18 million last year. And then before George Petrovic, we had Matt Turner, who is the current starting goalkeeper for the United States of America. So we've been spoiled with some very, very good goalkeepers in New England in the past half decade. And Rabas really has some tough shoes to fill and hasn't gotten off to a great start. So he's going to be tested tomorrow. He's certainly going to be tested in the second leg. He'll really need to step up and show he can fill those shoes in New England, because he will be tested.
All right. Well, I like it. As far as my players to watch, or at least the players that need to be having a really good game in order to walk away with a result here, I was going to say, just like you are our striker, Henry Martin, but I don't want to be copy and paste. So I'm actually going to go towards the right-hand side with Kevin Alvarez and Javairo Derulson. Now, with the lack of speed that's going to be on the opposite side of the wings, I expect us to play heavily through that right-hand side. And so Kevin and Javairo haven't really played enough minutes in order to build a relationship the way that Zendejas and Kevin Alvarez have. So I'm curious to see how that relationship will grow, because I think that if Kevin and Javairo could connect perfectly down that right-hand side, you are going to see a lot of threatening pace down the wings, whether it's Javairo going in through the channels, or maybe he can let Kevin Alvarez take the lead up top, and then he can kind of drift into a little bit into the middle. I think it's going to be interesting to see how those two can pair up. And I think we're going to have to rely on them heavily, seeing as how we don't have our star left winger in Quiñones. So, I'm curious to see how that happens. I already mentioned Diego Valdez, and so I won't bring him up again too. So, it's going to be interesting to see how America is able to cope with what you guys present going forward. And that midfield battle, I think, is going to be interesting as well. It's going to be, I think, a little bit of a boxing match at the beginning, maybe kind of feeling each other out. Okay, if anyone's going to try to take that kind of early decision to try to maybe risk a little bit of here and there. So I'm curious to see how that game kind of pans out, and hopefully we get a good one. Weather-wise, though, it's not going to be as cold as when Pumas played there with you guys. I don't expect any snow for tomorrow.
No snowstorms. I think it might rain. I think rain is expected on Wednesday. I haven't checked for tomorrow, but yeah, no snowstorms. The Pumas game, which we won 3-0. There's a shot of Gustavo Bo, who was our striker at the time, having a blast of a shot, and it rattled off the crossbar and snow fell off the crossbar. It was a very cool shot. And then, of course, after we ended up losing, we all realized that if that had gone in, we wouldn't have had to go to extra time penalty kicks in the second leg, and things would have been a lot better. But one quick thing before we move on, you talk about speed down the right side. One thing I'd also look at during the game is one player that we've gotten more minutes for lately is Ryan Spalding, who is a left back, and he can strictly play on the left back. And DeJuan Jones moves over to the right side when that happens. DeJuan Jones is probably our fastest outside back. He's got speed for days. So if the Revs kind of try to push up more, they might put in Spalding as kind of an attacking outside back and move DeJuan Jones over to the right side. So that might open up some opportunities for you guys late in the game. So that might be something to watch out for if you see Ryan Spalding come into the game. More than likely won't start, probably not a 90-minute player, but you might see him come in the 60th or 70th minute.
All right, interesting. Well, then, I'm curious to hear from you what your prediction is for tomorrow and what necessarily is a good result for New England going into the second leg at the Azteca.
Well, I'd say a good result. Realistically, I would feel comfortable with a 2-0 win. A 3-1 win. I think the Revs are going to need multiple goals, and we talk about how much risk is going to be taken. I think that's why the Revolution need to take risks. They need multiple goals here. Ideally, they keep a clean sheet as well. The away goals don't come into the factors for them, but I'm not totally sure if that will come to fruition. My prediction for this game, I'm going to go 1-1. But truth be told, this is easily a game you guys can take 1-0, 2-0. You mentioned taking risks. I think this is a game that if both teams want to take risks, it makes a lot of sense. If they don't want to take risks, it makes a lot of sense. So I think that this is a game where the Revolution will need to be on their toes to fight off some counterattacks, because things might open up later in the game, and that away goal could mean a lot. So I'll go 1-1 as my official prediction. But really, what do the Revs need? I'd say they 2-0, 3-1, 3-0. That is a kind of perfect world scenario for the Revolution that I'm not sure is possible.
Okay, well, we'll see. America isn't really necessarily known for giving up a lot of goals. We've been very good defensively speaking, so let's hope that they're capable of continuing that good trend. I do expect, though, America to kind of give us a tale of two halves situation with this matchup. I just think, depending on how the game goes, an early goal is vital for either side. I think whoever does kind of get that first goal is going to be able to kind of orchestrate the game or kind of manage it precisely as to how they want to, right? If America gets that early goal, I don't expect us to not necessarily press. I think we maybe then rely a little bit on sitting back, soaking up a little bit of the pressure and trying to get you guys on the counter to try to get that second goal, because obviously you guys are going to be in panic mode, knowing that you need to get those goals in order to try to salvage a result to get into the Azteca with something tangible. But if you guys do end up scoring that first goal, I think it'll be important that America doesn't lose their head and realize that there is not just 90 minutes left, but there is a whole other 90 at the Azteca. And knowing that you do have that kind of luxury of being able to kind of sit back and go into the Azteca and maybe take care of business there. But the last thing I think any of us in the America world want is to play the comeback kid. So I think that calm, cool heads can prevail and hopefully get that goal that either draws it or maybe can get another one to continue to get the result that a lot of Americanistas want, which is the victory. Because just how you guys have had a crazy amount of games in a short period, and the schedule seems so tight at times, America has been lingering with that as well for about almost a month and a half now. So, we're coming to the last couple of games in the regular season for us in the league, and if we can somehow manage to win the game in the first leg, kind of like we did against Chivas, we can kind of shift a little bit of focus and finish the league strong and know that the job got done. But I don't expect that to be the case come tomorrow. My prediction is going to be 2-1 for America. I think it's doable, it's capable. But I would hate to see you guys score one and us not get that clean sheet, because then that game isn't so manageable at the Azteca the way a 2-0 would necessarily be. So that'll be interesting. We got a couple of people in the chat saying, Chris Rivera saying you scared us with the 3-0 last time. I just tend to like to predict America winning 3-0. This time was not the case. Dylan saying America 2, New England 0. Lucky Duck saying 2-0. I agree. I think Dylan ended up changing his mind there, saying 2-1 says Chris. Chris says I can't be original. Chris Ramirez saying 1-0 to America. So there is some optimism from the America side, but I don't think that there should be any New England Revolution fans that are discouraged by this, because I do think that you guys have something to offer against us. And like I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, this isn't going to be a walk in the park for America, and I don't necessarily think that you guys will make it the case either. I think you guys are going to put up your boxing gloves, and you guys are going to make this as difficult as possible for us. So it should be interesting.
And again, we're coming off of a bye week, so they've had extra rest. I believe you guys played last weekend. So this is a road game for you guys. This is a game we have to come out and really set the tone early if we want any chance, because we can't take a 1-1 draw or a loss going into that second leg. So I fully expect the Revs to get out there, to press, to take some risks early, and we'll see how it plays out. We'll see if it works.
We'll see. You never know. We might just have a CONCACAF Champions Club Classic in our hands, So, well, I think with that said, I think that pretty much wraps it up in regards to what I had. Anything in particular you want to mention or say before we wrap it up?
No, just wanted to thank you for having me on. If your listeners are on Twitter, we're at Revolution Recap. We're also on Instagram, Facebook, every social media platform out there. You can find us at Revolution Recap. And just best of luck tomorrow. Really looking forward to this game, and really looking forward to playing you guys. It's not often we get to play a Mexican giant. It's certainly a more excitement, certainly a different feeling than playing the Philadelphia Union, which we do like 10 times a year. So very excited for the match.
Yeah, no, indeed. Likewise. Well, again, thank you so much for coming on. I've listened to you guys' podcast. You guys do an amazing job covering, very thorough, very in-depth. So if any America fan, for whatever reason, wants to jump on the New England Revolution train and be a fan of them, I highly recommend these guys. They know exactly what they're talking about. They do an amazing job, and so thank you, Greg, so much for coming on. And like I said, it's gonna be hopefully one of those matches where both teams have something to walk away with, and hopefully for America that's a victory. But with that said, I think that pretty much wraps it up for us here. Thank you guys so much for stopping by, for all the live listeners, for everyone else listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever it is you may listen to us. Thank you so much. We'll be back next week to recap everything that happened in the first leg and look ahead into the second leg at the Estadio Azteca. I'll come this week with a little mini short podcast to preview the game against Santos Laguna. And yeah, and if you guys haven't checked it out, we did officially release our website, so you guys can go and check it out. It's eagleeyepodcast.com. You guys can catch up with all the latest episodes there. We got some blog articles coming up as well with all things Club America. So yeah, should be fun, should be interesting. With that said, you guys have a wonderful time. Take care, and as always, arriba la America. Good night.
Ladies and gentlemen, this was another production of the Eagle Eye Podcast, the #1 source for all things Club America in English. Make sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Eagle Eye Podcast and get all the latest news and coverage. And subscribe to our podcast wherever it is you may listen.